Hi there. Gonna stray off my normal path here a little bit. Instead of talking about grandfatherly wisdom or whatever, I'm gonna talk about my retirement. Uh, Seems like a rather popular subject amongst people of my generation, boomers approaching that significant milestone. So I just wanted to share a story of how mine went. A little bit different than what most people's, and certainly different than what I had expected it would look like. So I had worked for almost 40 years, 39 years, something like that, at a commercial nuclear power plant. And my latest position for the last 15 years had been as a maintenance supervisor. I enjoyed it, but it's a lot of responsibility, a lot of expectations, a lot of hours, things like that. So on July 18th of 2017, I turned 60 years old, which was the point where I was eligible for my full retirement from the company. So in the months coming up to that, I'd been talking with a financial advisor just to kind of get my ducks in a row. You know, certainly wasn't going to be rich in retirement, but, I had potential to being, relatively comfortable, not a real major change in lifestyle. So that was nice. And my wife was still planning on working for a while. So anyways, July 18, I turned 60 years old, just back in 2017. About a week later, July 26th is the exact date. It was a Wednesday. I had a meeting with my superintendent. We had worked together for years. He'd been a supervisor, and he had not too recently been promoted to superintendent of the instrument and controls department where I worked. And it was, pretty straightforward meeting. We mostly just chit-chatted, and then at the end, he asked me, what my thoughts were on retirement, and if I'd, what I was planning on doing, because he turned 60 maybe a month or two later that year. There were a bunch of us all born in 1957, as it turns out. And so I told him that, no, I'd looked into it a little bit, and I had no plans on going anywhere unless some really extraordinary opportunity came along. And so we just chit-chatted about a few more things, and that was the end of it. Went back to my desk, pulled my phone out just to check to see if I'd had any messages or emails, and I get this email from a guy used to work with years ago, and he had a contracting company now, and he had a message, hey, Mark, long time no see. I've got an opportunity I think you might really be interested in. Why don't you give me a call if you get a chance? So I thought, wow, well, that's kind of out of the blue. So I had a few spare minutes, so I gave him a call and said, hey, what's up? Long time no see. And we exchanged pleasantries, and he said, hey, Mark, had a really interesting thing come along that I think you'd be interested in. We just picked up a contract doing work at the big nuclear power plant that the United Arab Emirates is building, Baraka nuclear power plant. And we're scrambling trying to get some qualified people together because this is a very short term or very short notice thing that came up, and we're trying to scramble to put together a team for it. And he, I was like, wow, okay. Certainly not something I'd ever considered, but, give me some details. So he talked about what the pay would be and what the conditions and what he knew about the job and everything. And so I was a little shell-shocked and said, okay, I will let you know in a couple days, because they had to, like I said, this was the end of July. They were supposed to be ready to deploy to head over there the first week or two of August. So not a lot of time to sit around and think about it. So that night I get home and I talked to my wife, Sandy, and I said, you would not believe the phone call I got today. And so I, went over all the details, how it was going to be a 12-month contract, the money that was involved, the specifics about when I'd have to go, when I'd come back, how often they'd pay for me to come back to visit, things like that. we talked about it for quite a while, because I was not 100% sure, and she was kind of caught just as flat-footed by it as I was. And so when we went to bed Thursday night, we had kind of left it like, well, this sounds great, but this is just too out there for us. This isn't the kind of thing we do. This is, pretty crazy. So Thursday, I decided, at work, obviously giving it a lot of thought, and I thought, maybe I shouldn't just tell him no just yet. And so I gave him a call back, and he said, tell you what, here's the guy that'll be leading the team over there. Here's his number if you want to give him a call. I'm sure he'd be, more than happy to talk to you and explain a little more detail. So I gave this guy a call out in Arizona and talked to him for maybe 15 minutes or so. Seemed like a wonderful guy. And suddenly I'm like, boy, I don't know. Maybe this is something I ought to do. So Thursday night, my wife and I talked about it a lot more. And where things were kind of hung up for both of us is I was worried that, okay, I'm going to be leaving, Sandy here to fend for herself for a year. I'll be back to visit a couple times, but for the most part, she'll be doing the garbage, didn't have any grandkids around here yet, so there was not that issue. And so I was worried about, about how she would be. And I expressed that to her, and she had said what she was worried about was that I was thinking I should take this job only because of the money, that I felt like I really had to, that I was kind of getting, myself boxed into it, that I really needed to do it because I didn't want to turn down that money. And so once we kind of worked past the point of, well, no, the money's nice, but, boy, what an opportunity. And she was like, no, be absolutely fine. My family's close by. My work is only 5 minutes away from the house at the time. She was like, I'm fine, doing this. Well, then we both decided that, okay, we're going to take this leap. So the next morning, this was a Friday, I went back to my superintendent, who I'd just talked to 2 days before, and said nothing was coming up. And I said, hey, funny story, Mike. And I turned in my resignation effective 1 week from that day. So that was a Friday morning. This would have been August 4th. A Friday would be my last day. And he was obviously totally shocked. He wasn't mad. We'd been friends for a long time, so he was understood, kind of, although he thought I was nuts. But, there's no animosity or anything like that with it. And he said, wow, okay, you got to do what you got to do. And so, that was a strange week between giving my notice and 7 days later, being my last day. Told the story a lot of times. People almost universally thought, you're crazy. I could never do that. Why are you doing that? And I'm just like, I don't know. Feels right. I think it'll be a wonderful adventure. The money's good. And so, a lot of interesting conversations. And then I'd get a lot of feedback, secondhand from upper management saying, he's doing what? He's going over there. He's going to hate it. No, he'll be back. He's never going to like doing something like that because I'm, always been kind of a straight arrow, middle of the road kind of guy. And this was about the last thing they expected, that I would go, jumping off to the far side of the world to do something, giving up a very good, very stable career to do something like that. And part of me then, it was kind of interesting because it's like, okay, well, I wonder if they're going to offer me any kind of counter offer to, say, hey, we'd really like to have you stick around. It's tough to get experienced supervisors. See if they'd make me a counter offer, see if they could sweeten the deal to make me stay. Not that I'm sure I would take it. I was pretty sure I wouldn't, but they never did, which I found kind of interesting. And up until that point, I'd been feeling a little bit guilty that, they'd by and large, he treated me well for nearly 40 years. And, suddenly when something else came along, they were just like, okay, sayonara, buddy. And it's like, wow, okay, well, I guess if they were going to lay me off, they wouldn't give me a week, 2 weeks notice. I'd get an hour notice in a cardboard box and a security guard politely standing there while I packed up so he could walk me out. And at that point, I suddenly didn't feel guilty anymore. It's like, you know what? I gave them a lot more notice than they would give me in a similar situation if the shoe was on the other foot. And then August 5th, I was suddenly without without the job I'd had for literally my entire life. So it was a little strange feeling, very exciting. And then became a lot of waiting. Originally they wanted to deploy like around August 11th or something. Well, kept pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. Ended up being second week of September. Finally caught the flight out of the airport here. My wife dropped me off and made a connection in Chicago, and then a 16-hour flight to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. So then just a long few days getting settled in, orientation classes, staying at a real fancy hotel. Of course, everything's fancy there that you stay at. And got to know the rest of the team, about 16 of us, if I remember correctly. And then a week or so later, we got moved out 2 hours west out into the desert to the city of Ruwais, a big oil refinery city that was right next door to this nuclear site. Got settled into a big worker compound with a nice little, rather Spartan apartment, but more than sufficient for just me. And that's where I lived for the next year while I worked at this power plant. And to say it was a cultural shock, yeah. Didn't deal directly with a lot of Emiratis. There were a few, but they were mostly students and engineers and things like that. A lot of Malaysians, South Africans, more of the laborers were all Pakistanis, Southeast Asians, things like that. So it was a real mixing pot of all sorts of people and different cuisines in the dining hall. So a lot of changes there, all sorts of different languages being spoken. Of course, everyone could speak English. And I learned a lot of things about myself. This was literally the first time in my life I had ever lived on my own, because my wife and I got married at 19 years old. We had lived each with our parents right after high school for a year and a half. Then we got married and moved into an apartment together. So for her and I both, this was quite literally the very first time we'd lived on our own. And so that was nice in some ways, obviously a big change. Really missed her, and we would talk on the phone every night. But it was a lot of opportunities. I had to deal with this boss that I talked to on the phone. Turned out to be quite a challenge. Extremely smart guy, but we didn't always see eye to eye. And so I had to learn not how to push back, where I'm normally a pretty low confrontation kind of guy. And there were one or two opportunities where I had to really find my spine and take a stand on an issue on how something I felt it should be done and why I felt his approach wasn't correct. So that was a good learning experience. Had a couple of fantastic opportunities, because where United Arab Emirates is located, it's really very central to a lot of stuff there, being where it is in the Gulf of Arabia, whatever you want to call it. And so I had an opportunity to hook up with a little tour group out of Dubai. And for less than $1,000, I think it was like $960, I was able to get with this group and do an all-expense trip down to Kenya for a 3-day safari out among the Maasai on the Serengeti. Absolutely amazing. Obviously way too short, but it is something I never would have had the opportunity to do from home. I mean, obviously I could have, but it would have cost 10 times as much easily. And so that was really cool. I had one of the long Muslim holidays. We had like a week off, so I went to Europe, flew to Milan, and then just took a train day by day, never knowing for sure where I was going to go. Just had my backpack with some clothes and my cameras, and I just slowly started wandering my way up towards the Netherlands to stay with my cousins for a couple days. But that was really cool. Every morning I'd wake up and say, okay, where do I want to go tonight? And I'd just look at the maps and say, oh, this looks like a cool little town. And so I'd find the right train, get on the train, get off at this little town, walk to find the tiny little hotel that I had made a reservation for the night. And it was so cool. Something, again, I never would have had the opportunity to do. I'd been to Europe before, but it was always a very much, fly into Amsterdam, get picked up by the relatives, stay at their homes, fly home a week later or whatever. I'd done that a few times. So this was a really cool experience, just being completely on my own with the clothes on my back and a backpack, kind of reliving at 60 years old what most people would do like at 20. So yeah, so not make us too long. So after a year, my contract was done. Our work was wrapped up. Flew home. Absolutely the most wonderful feeling in the world. Hugging my wife, Sandy, at Detroit Airport when I got in. And it was just, such an appreciation, that you kind of start taking things for granted. Well, that was very much the case. And so it was a great experience, but it was just so good to be home, to see my wife, see my sons. At that point now, my oldest grandson, he was going to be born in about 3 months after that. So that was exciting. So the thing that was really kind of interesting with this, and I didn't really, just talking to my wife the other day when I was considering making a video with this, is that, otherwise my retirement would have been, give the 2 or 3 weeks notice, probably kick the can down the road a few years because it's like, well, I should wait a little bit because it'll, my retirement check will be a little bit bigger if I wait till 63 or 65 or 67. So I probably would have kicked it down the road a little bit just because of inertia. That's what I was used to doing, being at that job. But the retirement would have been different too. The idea of, walking out the door on a Friday and the next Saturday morning waking up and say, now what? Monday morning comes around, I'll wake up at 4:30 when my alarm would normally go off, and now what? So this year in the Middle East, obviously a lot of challenges, a lot of stress, but a lot of adventure and opportunities. It really was a good bridge, if you will, to retired life, because now when I got home, it's like, you know what? I've always wanted to learn about ham radio and get into that. Or I always wanted to do some jewelry making. And so that started me big time into my odyssey of a long trail of hobbies, which, that's all right. Don't wait until you have to leave to think about leaving. If a leap of faith excites you and it scares you, at least consider it. Don't dismiss it out of hand just because, boy, this sounds scary. This is something I've never done. I don't know. That sounds like a lot. And the last part is, the company you've worked at for 20, 30, 40 years, they're going to survive just fine without you. It's like that old thing. You take your hand out of the bucket of water. Does it leave a hole? No, it fills in. They figure out a way to get by without you. You may have been a valued employee, but you're just an employee. You're just one, cog in the whole chain there. So the bigger question is, will you survive without them? And that's a little bit tougher because it's easy to get your identity wrapped up into, hey, Mark, who are you? Well, I'm a maintenance supervisor. Well, okay, that's what I do or did, but who am I? And that's a whole different story. What kind of adventures have I had? What do I believe in? What do I enjoy doing? So keep all that in mind. So to wrap this up, a quote from my old buddy Seneca here, the Roman philosopher. He said, it's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. So walking away for me wasn't about quitting. It was about starting the rest of my life. And the way I did it may not be the way that works for most people, but it worked for me, it worked for my wife, and it was a fabulous transition. So it's been a great run so far. So anyways, enough of this. If you've got similar stories about an unexpected adventure you went on, or about how your retirement snuck up on you in a different way than what you'd expected, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Otherwise, this is Opa signing off, wishing you, whenever you're watching this, wherever you're at, hope you're having a great day. Bye-bye.